Hello, everybody, and welcome to another In Book Passages ongoing series of conversations with authors. I'm your host, Jonathan Spencer. Thank you for joining us live or later if you are viewing this in our archives. Either way, we at Book Passage really appreciate your support of these online events, which in turn support both our stores and our many, many guest authors. I'm certain that after today's conversation that you're going to want to buy our featured books, so we've made it very convenient for you. You'll find a link on our YouTube channel page, which will take you directly to our website, where you can easily order a copy. In the alternative, if you're in the Bay Area, we would love to see you at either of our stores at San Francisco Ferry Building or in Corte Madera. And you can also call us at any time, and a bookseller will be happy to fulfill your order over the phone. We ship books anywhere, so if you're out of town, give us a call. And do visit us either virtually or in person and support independent booksellers. Regarding today's event, you're probably going to have a lot of comments and questions for our guests. So feel free to put those questions in the chat, and we will get to them at the end of the event when we round everything up in our Q&A session. Now, on to the event. Today, I am privileged to welcome our guest author, Tim Burkett, who is here to celebrate the publication of his book, Enlightenment is an Accident, subtitled Ancient Wisdom and Simple Practices to Make You Accident Prone. A warm-hearted guide to Buddhist practice for those ready to contend with the reality that enlightenment, the realization of non-self, cannot be achieved by the self. Drawing on stories of his first Zen master and his own decades of practice and teaching, Tim Burkett reveals how to live in the world with a deep joy that comes from embracing the work and the play of this very moment. With the wisdom and humor of a seasoned practitioner, familiar with all manner of eccentric fixations and silly dead ends, he offers views and practices we can use to support the paradoxical process of letting enlightenment happen on its own. Critical response has been unanimous in praising this new book, calling it illuminating, insightful, moving, and suffused with kindness and a truly warm voice. And my favorite, I always like to pull a quote that draws my attention, makes me feel good. Enlightenment is an Accident beautifully weaves stories from ancient wisdom, 60 years of Zen practice, and the author's time with some of the great planters of Buddhism on North American soil, create a warm-hearted invitation to a more joyous, more free, and kinder way of being in the world. Tim Burkett began practicing Zen Buddhism in San Francisco in 1964. He is the former CEO of the largest nonprofit organization in Minnesota for individuals with mental illness, and served as guiding teacher of the Minnesota Zen Meditation Center from 2004 to 2021. He is a psychologist, Zen Buddhist priest, and author of not only today's book, but also Nothing Holy About It and Zen in the Age of Anxiety. Tim will be joined in conversation today by Bussho Lahn, a Zen student and teacher and the founder of Flying Cloud Zen Spiritual Practice Community. He's also a popular speaker, retreat leader, spiritual director, author, and is a senior priest at the Minnesota Zen Meditation Center. His book, Singing and Dancing Are the Voice of the Law, was published in early 2022. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to their very capable hands. Thank you both for joining us, Tim and Bussho.
Well, thank you for such a warm introduction.
My pleasure.
Happy to be here and vicariously back home, because that Bay Area was my home for my entire childhood, adolescence, and early adulthood. The way Bussho and I are going to do this is that I'm going to talk about this book, and it has 3 sections to it, and I'm going to pause after the first section, and Bussho will give his feedback, his input, and then I'll do the second, and he'll do the same, and then the third. We'll see how time goes, but it should go okay. Anyway, wisdom and practices to make you accident prone. You can't do it. You can't get enlightened on your. You have to die to everything. You have to die to everything you know, everything you don't know, everything you assume, everything you expect, even the idea that you have to die. But you can make yourself accident prone. And that's what spiritual practice really is all about. You can say Zen practice, but I have a more broad perspective. spiritual practice, spiritual practice. So I talk about the three phases in the book: the settling in phase, the commitment to practice phase when we've made the commitment and then we're just working hard, hard, doing these practices, and then thirdly, the falling awake phase where we completely let go of everything, including trying to let go, and we begin to deeply enjoy just being, just living, even just dying, because we're living and dying on each moment. So first, I want to talk about the settling in phase. Finding a teacher is important in all the spiritual practices that I've done. Finding a teacher, it doesn't have to be a high up teacher. I mistrust high up teachers who are perfect teachers, but the best teachers, who are all of whom are somewhat flawed, help us see through the limitations of our little narrow self-image and our persona that we carry around. Wei Neng in the 9th century said, "If you reflect on your own true face, the secret will be found within yourself. Not your personas, not these images you carry around, but something deeper, something deeper." Bussho, the famous haiku poet, said, "Year after year, a monkey's face wears a monkey's mask." We're always caught by these different masks that we think we need to wear to feel okay about ourselves, just to feel like we're part of a community. We're afraid to just be who we are, so always masking up. And the best teachers teach us how to have an aspiration that we move toward, to open up to this big reality beyond our little compartmentalized selves, and and move along that aspiration as a path, and also do dot practice. So I call that in the book dot and line practice. So the line is there's a path. There are very specific paths in the spiritual traditions, all of them. And we need to aspire to stay on that path, regardless of what happens. But the dot practice is even more important. Each moment of being aware and alive in this moment with our spiritual practice is what forwards us on the path to the accident of enlightenment. That's what forwards us. And Suzuki was my teacher, Shunryu Suzuki. He was my teacher before he was a big deal. Um, uh, he used to rail against stepladder Zen because he saw us always kind of reaching out, trying to get something later, and asking him and trying and asking him, so that we were never doing dot practice. We were never just really where we were, which is really deep spiritual practice. You just imbibe the moment that you're in. You give yourself to it, whether you're sitting on your cushion or whether you're going for a walk in nature. You just do that. So one of the stories I tell in this book, and probably in one of my other books, is I was getting ready to go to Japan from San Francisco to practice Zen years ago, and Suzuki was helping me find the right monastery, and I wanted the right monastery. Bussho remembers this story well. I wanted the one where they did lots of meditation and didn't have all these tourists hanging around and all this fancy ceremony all the time. So I thought I finally had kind of found the right one, although I was still debating it, going back and forth in my head. Wasted a lot of meditation time in doing this. I hadn't talked much to Suzuki about it, but he was sitting in his breakfast nook with me one morning and pointing to raku pottery on the shelf. Raku pottery is Japanese pottery in which the flaws are baked in, and each one is distinct and has its own beauty. And he looked at me. I don't think I said very much about what I was planning or what I was thinking about or what I was comparing. I must have said something though, because he looked at me and he said, "If you try to find the best cup, you will not appreciate any of it." So that's dot practice. We're always trying to get something later. This is the best cup. You may not think it, feel that way, but if you really take care of it, if you really breathe with it, if you really do your spiritual practice right here, that's that's how you prepare yourself best for the accident of enlightenment. And we have to be careful not to spiritually bypass, because that's when we just do line practice, when we just do path practice. We have to honor our broken places, our vulnerable places, as tools to make us accident prone, because those are openings. And I say on page 38, I talk about deep seeing. And I say many spiritual and religious organizations completely ignore the darker elements. The fear body, which buries these negative emotions deep inside of us, the shadow self, repressed ideas, instincts, impulses, weaknesses, desires, perversions, traumatic memories, embarrassing fears, and a myriad of small and large humiliations, whatever we don't want to admit to having. But if we spiritually bypass, we're always going for somewhere else. We're never being here. We're never opening up. We're never committing to feeling the suffering and pain with kind attention and compassion that is our door to having this accident of enlightenment. So I want to pause now and see what Bussho would like to add or subtract from what I've said.
I I suppose I should subtract all of it, right? Being a good Zen student. It's so it's so good just to share this virtual space with you, Tim. And this book is so strong. It's such a beautiful offering. There's so much here. And I'm always struck by your ability, and I think this book does this brilliantly well, to describe pretty, from time to time at least, pretty lofty, pretty abstract, pretty conceptual Buddhist teachings in a really everyday way that allows people, I think, to touch them and contact them. So I'm thinking of your Raku pottery story, and you are correct. I remember it. I remember that story well. I've heard it many times. It's such a beautiful example of picking and choosing, and how, of course, we get lost in comparing mind, and we lose our connection to the moment. What I'm really interested in, though, in this first section, and knowing me the way you do, I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear this, but the amount of time and emphasis that you place very gently on what you just got through talking about, spiritual bypass, and our all too human tendency to use Zen practice, or, as you say, any spiritual practice, really, to kind of do an end run around some of the more difficult, darker shadow work. Is that something that you've seen? Have you seen a change in people's relationship with shadow work on the cushion and off the cushion in your years of practice? Is that something that you've seen evolve over these years?
I think people are acknowledging that much better than they used to, and I'm not sure why. I think maybe it's the coming together of the therapeutic and the spiritual point of view. Um, I think that's why, but it's better. It's better. You know.
Is that part of?
What's your perception?
Well, in the 30 years that I've been practicing about half as long as you have. In the 30 years that I have been practicing, it feels to me like I've seen a lot more of that. But I'm also aware the majority of my practice has been at MZMC with you as a teacher, and your psychological framework, the years that you spent studying and practicing as a psychologist, is obviously informed your Dharma perspective. And for me, it was helping. I'm aware of the text on the back of your book saying authentic American Zen is taking shape, really, with the help of offerings like your book. And it feels to me like this is part of the most skillful merging of what we call the East and what we call the West, is the embrace of Buddhism, of Western psychology, and the embrace of, from Western psychology, of a lot of what we've learned from the Buddhist teachings, right?
Thank you. Thank you. I couldn't agree more.
Yes.
So now I'm going to move on to part 2. So
All
now,
right.
now we've made the commitment to do dot line practice per above. Dot line, right? The path and also being right here, being right. So now the next phase is stumbling toward enlightenment. Hard work. And I talk about 5 tools. I have a chapter on each tool that we use. Uh, and I'm just going to talk about them one at a time. I mean, there are many tools. I won't say these are arbitrary, but I did select these because I've used them a lot with students along the way. So first of all, we have the 5 hindrances, which are a big deal in Buddhism. The hindrances to opening, the hindrances to awakening. But I talk about them, of course, as portals, Craving and greed, restlessness and worry, lethargy and boredom, doubt, aversion, anger, and hatred. Whew, whew. All of them are portals. And on page 56, I say, looking closely at each hindrance, we can discover the connected emotion, recognizing how it intensifies, what thoughts, sensations come up, and we can trace it back to its root. This is not an intellectual process. This is an experiential process. We can do this. Then it is a portal for us. That's the first portal. The second portal, I take this from early Buddhism, bringing the aggregates into view, bringing the 5 aggregates into view, and modern day Theravada. The 5 aggregates that are dissed in the Heart Sutra, but we won't get into that. I don't want to talk much about those, except to say that they are made up of contact, sensation, feeling, perception, mental formation or impulse, and consciousness. So Buddha, the historical Buddha says in the Pali Canon, there's no self, but there are these 5 components that make up a self. I make contact, I have a sensation feeling that creates a perception. Perception means that an impulse arises, and then there's consciousness arises. And if we can just bring them 5 into view slowly, gently, as in a meditative way, the 5th one doesn't have to dominate and tangle up the first 4. The first 4 are all in the present. They're all dot practices. Consciousness is a good one, but if it takes off and just does line practice forever and ever, we're never here. We're never here. So bringing the aggregates in the view is a really early practice and one that I still use. Continually bring those old conditioned ideas that are passed down from generation to generation into view. That the consciousness that takes over dominates. And when we do, I also talk in this chapter about those consciousness creating layers of skin that protects us through our thoughts about yesterday and tomorrow and what it should have been, could have been, might have been, could be. Instead of being attentive to right here, we're protecting ourselves in those layers of skin. But our practice is about gently and kindly shedding that skin. Those are the layers of the Naga, the serpent who enlightened Buddha, who turned into a dragon when he got to China, because the Chinese are scared to death of snakes. So they already had dragons as their main motif, spiritual animal motif protecting them. So shedding those skins, and I say on page 75. Each time we shed a skin, even though we're taking a risk, we do. The skin protects us. What we chatter about protects us. When we fight, when we flee, we're protected by something. but we're shedding the beliefs, we're shedding the memories that give us comfort and security, one skin at a time. You can't, if you just pull all the skins off, you'll just be raw. And that's not healthy. There's no enlightenment there. But as shedding, we shed one skin after another, we become lighter and lighter and more transparent and more joyfully alive. So that's the second portal. The third portal is mantras, gathas, and malas. Mantras, gathas, and malas. Staying present so we can stumble toward enlightenment. Sometimes we need to narrow our focus, our attention. Negative emotions are starting to flood us. Then we might need a mantra. Then we might need a gatha. Then we might need a mala. I'm not going to talk much about those. You can read read the book. But I was flooded with fear many years ago at Tassajara with Tassajara Zen Monastery, and I didn't know Suzuki even gave mantras. I was perspiring so much that he told me to change my clothes during a fifth day of a 7-day retreat. But I was focused. I wasn't just I was focused, but I was flooded. He said, "Go change your shirt." And then when I came back, he said, "Repeat this mantra: Gate, Gate, Para Gate." So that mantra really helped me. It helped me calm down or open up and be in my moment. And that's an example. Another example is you can create your own mantras, gathas, and work with malas. And when I had Lyme's disease, and at its worst, I couldn't walk to the lake, which is 3 blocks from my house, but I could drive to the lake, and I made up my own gatha. The lake is named Bide Makaska. Looking at Bide Makaska, seeing my true nature in its reflection, heart, mind at peace. It really helped me. It helped me. And then I abbreviated it to looking, seeing, nature, peace. Looking, seeing, peace. And I did that every day for maybe a month. And my own gatha. And you can read about those in the book and practice with them. And maybe you're already doing mantras, gathas, or malas, or all 3. When I was in Bhutan years ago, I saw the monks and nuns working their malas all the time, their 108 prayer beads. And they worked them so hard that they were really smoothed down. And I could tell they were muttering something to themselves. I think they were muttering Om Padme Hum, or whatever that is, over and over again, their mantra. So that's the third portal I talk about. The fourth one, of course, is, and I say course because we're meditators. Probably most of you who are watching or listening, I guess you're not watching, are meditators. And that's seated meditation. And I talk in my chapter about focus meditation, narrowing so we don't get flooded by emotion with our counting our breathing or repeating something to ourselves. Bare awareness in which we're just open to whatever is happening and just recognize the emotion, recognize the feeling, accept it, and just let it follow it to its root. And what we call shikantaza, which is don't know meditation. Don't know. What my teacher Katagiri called stupid zazen. Just do stupid zazen, he would say. Or what Wei Nung called just sit like a dunce. And maybe you can see how that's dot practice. Maybe you can't, but try it. It's pretty cool. Pretty cool. So that's the fourth portal. The fifth portal is immersion in nature. Oh, all the way back to the beginning of Zen and Taoism in China, immersion in nature. Not so much in Indian Buddhism. In China and Japan, big time. Because our mind calms down if we immerse ourselves in nature. Generally, we feel some connection with the sky, with the water, with the smells of the flowers and the trees. Just calms us down. When I was a kid growing up in the San Francisco Bay Area, my dad was a John Muir fan. And John Muir was a guy who, in the Sierra Nevadas, spent months in the Sierra Nevadas charting them and writing about them. And then he did little books. And my father would carry one of the John Muir books when we went hiking in the Sierras every summer. And here's one John Muir quote: "Between any two pine trees, there was a door leading to a new way of life." Between any two pine trees, there was a door leading to a new way of life. Oh, wonderful, wonderful. So I was blessed in my childhood in that way. In other ways, maybe not so blessed, but that way. Nature helps us open up, helps us see clearly and not be caught by what happened before and what might happen later. A monk asked in Chan Buddhism, this is during the golden age of Chinese Zen, "Where do I enter the path?" The teacher says, "Do you hear the sound of the stream? Yes. Enter there. Enter there. Enter there." So that's a fifth portal that I talk about. And D.C. Suzuki, not my guy, but the guy before him, talked about nature, the wildness of nature, and how the wildness, before we divide it up, before we map it out, really helps us open up beyond the contours of our thinking, so that we feel connected rather than separated from this wonderful natural world. Dogen says to fully enter the mountain is to fully enter the mountains. To fully enter the mountains is to fully enter the swamps. Ooh, you don't want the swamps. Nobody wants the swamps, but the swamps are there. If we fully enter them, they're beautiful, they're wonderful. Even if they have kind of a putrid smell, there's life in that putridness. That putridness indicates life, indicates composting, which creates great life. There are mountains hidden in mountains. There are mountains hidden in swamps. The absolute freedom of letting our map go and just being in nature. My teacher used to say, if you want to tame your sheep or your cow, give it a large pasture. Give it a large pasture. So I just talked about opening through the hindrances, bringing the aggregates into view, mantra work, seated meditation, being in nature, all ways to help us stumble toward enlightenment. And we will make mistakes along the way. That's okay. That's part of the whole deal. And we think we know things. We contract around what we think we know, and our neurons harden. But through mistakes, we can return to the original neuroplasticity. There's lots of research on this neuroplasticity that a child has. So those splinters, those fragments that we cut off from, we can hold them with kind awareness and curiosity, and our private parts are no longer private. We don't necessarily share them with others, but they're not private from us. And we become whole. We return to our original wholeness. And I say in my book on page 127, each rejected aspect within our shadow carries within it the seed of wisdom. It is waiting to show us something important about ourselves. But this feels quite perilous, as it requires us to see things we don't want to see, accept the unacceptable, and embrace the deplorable. Embrace the wisdom of the shadow, which is about manifesting wholeness and balance. And that Zen teacher Dogen calls his whole being Buddha nature. Although I must say he does not have the psychological orientation that I do. But everybody's different. Everybody's different. And that's wonderful. And our difference is our commonality. So I think I want to pause now, turn it over to Bussho before I move on to the last part.
Bussho. All right. Yes, yes. What really strikes me this time through, Tim, with this second section is, and this is to me, this is such a Tim Burkett thing, but I also know as a Zen teacher, you're kind of speaking on behalf of the whole tradition when that world affirming perspective comes out of your mouth, the earth affirming feeling that Zen, it kind of departs ways from its Theravadan parents in a sense by really affirming not only nature and the natural world, but one of the things you've modeled and taught for the years I've known you at Zen Center is the kind of brilliant kung fu thing you did with the hindrances.
Hmm.
What if instead of what if instead of negating those and pathologizing those, what if instead we affirm them and say, these can be doors, right? The greed and the boredom and the aversion, everything, those can be gateways, those can be portals. And then going on to, when you go on to talk about the Naga on page 76, say for those of you who have not yet seen the cover, this is the cover with spilled milk. Enlightenment as an accident. This is the spilled milk on the cover. You use, and I know you've taught this, you've used this phrase for years, taking the exquisite risk.
Mm-hmm.
Does that feel like a different relationship with fear and constriction, all the stuff you were naming? Is that right?
I think it's an exquisite risk. I think it's just wonderful. We think it's going to be really scary, but if we do it, if the setting is right, if it's not an exquisite risk, if we just take acid at a rock concert, that's not the exquisite risk. But if the setting is right, we're really ready to take an exquisite risk. And we need a spiritual mentor. Doesn't have to be a guru or even a Zen master, just a spiritual mentor, someone we trust to help us. Um, uh, and we need an environment where we feel relatively safe to take that exquisite risk. Don't you think, Bussho?
So important. And you used the metaphor that we've heard so much in Zen community of the good sangha, the good spiritual community being like a rock tumbler, where we come up against our own edges and the edges of each other, and by doing that we become more polished, we become smoother. In the age of Zoom, now that we have the possibility of people in even rural areas connecting to centers like MZMC, is your sense that people have more opportunity for rock tumbler practice in the virtual world, or is that changed in a different way?
I think it's plus and minus. There's more opportunity, and there's also more opportunity for hiding out. Because
Yeah.
my Dharma talks, I'm always teasing people. Last time I gave my Dharma talk on Sunday, I think I had, in addition to the 40 people in the room, 55 people online, and only 10 of them were showing their faces. I said, "Oh, the rest of you guys are eating ice cream in bed, huh?" Oh, but and not to make fun of them, but this we actually have to practice with each other. Uh, we and so just a two-dimensional spiritual community without that commitment, it could do it. You can do it, but and you really have to stay with one community. I'm sorry, you guys. You look around and find a good community, one that resonates, but you, any community is going to have rock. You're going to be people you don't like. People are going to be pulling stuff on you. It's just I'm a therapist, right? So we have this joke as therapists. Maybe Bussho has heard me say it. I used to be a family therapist. Oh, another dysfunctional family. Oh, another dysfunctional family. Then we looked at each other and we said, well, they're all dysfunctional. So why do we even use the word dysfunctional? They're families. This is the rock tumbler of us getting along with each other as human beings. And you should find a family you resonate with, but you're never going to find a family where you don't get rock tumbled. That's how you get smooth. And that's how you prepare to have the accident of enlightenment.
So sticking with it, sticking
Yep,
with it.
yep,
And then
yep.
then we're prepping ourselves to fall awake. Falling awake is your third section.
Yeah, falling awake. Okay, falling awake. And the harder we push, the more our neurons harden. But we can release this whole. We may be on the verge of having an accident when we release. When the mind gives up, when the boundaries start to dissolve, Dogen calls this body and mind falling away. He calls this again being enlightened. We are enlightened by all life. Dualistic thinking falls away. During the pandemic, so many of my mentees were caught in extreme dualism. hopelessness. All or never thinking. All or never thinking is extreme dualismus. Dualism. I can never do this. The things will never get better. I can never change. This is impossible for me. You can do it, but I can never do it. That's extreme dualism, and that's where depression and extreme dualism go together. So it's not bad. It's just something that we need to practice with. We need to get help with, because that extreme dualism fragments us so that we have no joy. We have no joy. But anyway, we through this practice, dualistic thinking, the all or nothing, the either or thinking falls away, and we collapse. We collapse the dichotomy between suffering and joy, which Thich Nhat Hanh calls interbeing. Well, that's an interesting term that he uses, interbeing. I like it. But we say dependent co-arising. That's a little more. That's what we Katagiri Roshi use. Dependent co-arising, and I could say also dependent co-leaving. Interbeing. And I call this in this section dancing with Nagarjuna's tetralemma, the Naga, the serpent. And if I've taught Nagarjuna, who is the philosophical hero. He's the Nagarjuna, the serpent hero of the early Mahayana Prajnaparamita texts, including the Heart Sutra and the Diamond Sutra. So if we dance his tetralemma, as I've helped my students, encourage my students to do that, as embodying it, starting with I am suffering, feeling I'm suffering, even though it's specifically about, moving to the fact that I know that I'm suffering and I'm able to be there with it means I'm not suffering. So we're moving to I'm not suffering, moving to the third one, both I am and I am not. And then finally, just letting it all fall away. And we live a lot more lightly. We don't have to have an enlightenment experience because it's just light. It's light because we're not hanging on to something. We're just being. We're just enjoying life. So these are all the portals into boundless light. And we have new attitude towards not only the hindrances and other things, but even the paramitas, which are very important in Buddhism. Generosity, ethical behavior, patience, effort, meditation, and wisdom. Generosity to our stinginess. That's non-duality. We're stingy because we're afraid. Generosity to someone else's stinginess. They're stingy because they're afraid. We can be generous in that non-dual way. That can be a portal into boundless light. I think so. Dogen calls this taking the backward step and turning your light inward. No longer glued to the foreground. We just enjoy the background. Entering the unknown. So I'm going to finish with a story that is in the book, which Bussho has probably heard me tell many times too. Remember, my dad took me into the Sierras every year, my dad and mom, with a little John Muir book. And they decided, I was 9, that we could climb this 14,000 foot peak, Mount Langley in the Sierras. And so we set off before dawn from the Golden Trout Camp. We had to set off quite a bit before dawn to make it in one day. And I had a wonderful trail map. And there were signs all along that really helped me. I would get disoriented. I could think, only another 0.5 miles to the next rest stop. Only another 7/10 of a mile to the next water. It really helped me having a map. We need maps. But then we got to Timberline. No maps. I'd never been to Timberline before. The trees were all gone, just rocks, no maps. There were some ducks, if you know what ducks are, some cairns, but I didn't know anything about those. I couldn't figure them out from anything. And I was really scared. But my mother was my spiritual teacher. She didn't know it. She was in front of me, encouraging me, come on, you can go without a map. You just watch and you just take one step and then another step. So I breathed. I didn't know about spiritual practice. I didn't know about meditation. I just took one step and then another, and I cried. I cried, but then I took another step and then another and another, and it looked like that Beyond Timberline thing just went on forever. But I got into a nice 9-year-old meditative state finally and forgot about the map entirely, forgot about the trail markers entirely. And then first thing I knew, I was at the top. And I looked all around, and that's my 9-year-old Enlightenment experience. I was so happy. I was so joyed just to be there, just with a huge sky, looking all around. And my mother, of course, wanted me to sign, 9-year-old boy did this, but I just thought that was a joke because I was having too much fun being 9-year-old enlightened, whatever that it may be. So that's what I want to say about the third section. And now I want to turn it over to Bussho, and then we'll have a little time for Q&A.
I have heard that story before, and just like the rest of these stories, each time you hear it, you're a different person, right? So you hear it in a different way. And this time I thought, you got John Muir with you, who is a mystic, right? You got your mom teaching you walking meditation. You were really primed, weren't you? You were primed.
I was, although nobody knew anything about meditation in my family, but
I love it. I love it. When the student is ready, the teacher appears, right? So there you had your first mystic with John Muir, and your first instruction from Kenyon from your mom on the slopes of the mountain. I know we got to turn it over to the audience here. We want to take people's questions, but the lasting, one of the many things that this book does for us is it leaves a very lasting impression around the central idea. The central kind of motif of this offering, Tim, it feels to me like, is that it just happens. It really does just happen. And when we say it, we mean a lightening, right? A lightening of the heart, a more joyous way of being, a different way of experiencing life. And you're so much Suzuki's student when you have your whole teaching career really de-emphasized the big breakthrough experience, the big Kensho. When that shows up, it's great. It's the scenery. I think you've called it before. It's the scenery, but de-emphasizing that and instead replacing it with a definition of enlightenment and freedom that just includes, as we said before, world affirming, life affirming, everydayness, ordinariness, non-specialness. I think it really opens up the possibilities of connecting to practice for people. And so, am I right in thinking that that's kind of the through line of the entire offering? This book is.
I think so.
It just happens. You just do it, and it just all by yourself. And the reason I'm emphasizing that as we close here is because I experienced that teaching the way I experienced it when I first heard it all those years ago. I experienced it as a great relief. It's just a great relief. Oh, I don't have to do it. I just show up, and it happens all by itself.
Yeah.
Is that how the place it comes from in you?
I think that's wonderful. It takes some faith. It's not faith in some idea, but faith in the fact that you have this capacity, that we all have this capacity.
Yeah. To be accident prone.
Yeah.
Isn't that beautiful?
Oh.
Yeah, to embrace that. This is a fantastic offering to a world that needs it. And so, on behalf of all the people who will not get a chance to say this to you, thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for your book.
Oh, of course. I'm indirectly thanking my Dharma sister out there, Wanda.
I don't know if this is going to be on YouTube. I think it is. Can you show your book too? Or do you not have it there with you?
I don't have it with me because I'm so humble. I'm so humble, Tim. But you can find it at all good independent bookstores everywhere. Singing and Dancing is the voice of the law, or you can find it on my website, flyingcloudzen.org. It's easy to find.
Thank you.
Oh, here comes the ringleader. Here comes our
I just wanted to say that if you go to the book passage event page for Tim's book, you will find a link for Bussho's book. So we will certainly provide information for that for you. And I know that we're waiting for folks to put a few questions in there, but I thought maybe this might be a good time to talk about your relationship with each other. And obviously, Bussho shared earlier on that, Tim, that you were his teacher. And so it seems like the passing of wisdom down is just this wonderful part of this story that, you know, that your life has been structured. And I've been watching you share wonderful stories back and forth with each other in such a relaxed and wonderful manner. It's inspiring in its own way. And it also seems to talk about what you're teaching in a way that's subtle and quiet, because your voices round out. You get a warmth around your faces when you speak to each other, and that's just speaks of so much that's subtle in this life as well as serendipitous.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Yes, warm hand to warm hand is how Zen has been described. As it really strongly emphasizes the teacher to student relationship. That's how the tradition is handed down from teacher to student. We don't learn it from an institution. You learn it from a person.
Right.
And so Tim taught me really early on. I met Tim probably 20 years ago. Something like that. Does that sound right, Tim? About 20 years?
Sure.
Probably, yeah. I remember him telling me Zen is caught, not taught. So all I had to do was hang out. I mean, he was telling me the same thing then. You'll sooner or later you'll fall backwards into waking up. Just hang out and keep doing it. But yeah, it does lead to it is expected to have a warm-hearted and warm-handed transmission when understood properly. Does that feel fair to say, Tim?
I like that.
Yeah.
I think it's wonderful.
It's very warm that way. It has a kind of a family feel to it.
Next night, I don't necessarily believe in next reincarnation, but next life I will be your student.
Yeah, well, just fill out the application forms. Don't be intimidated. There's a bunch of forms of ID.
Well, will you help me have an accident?
I will do my utmost.
We don't want to happen any sooner than it's supposed to.
Oh dear.
Well, I also wanted to bring up. I thank you so much for speaking about John Muir, Tim, because he holds a special place in my heart as well.
Oh, does he?
Yeah, I've had another life in which I was a performer and participated in a musical about his life.
Really?
In Martinez. He has a Bay Area connection, and in Martinez, just not too far from the city.
A musical about John Muir's life.
His life. And I was hiking in the valley with some of the music from that show in my ears, up down near Bridal Veil Falls, and thinking about climb the mountains, get their glad tidings, just those wonderful feelings about what nature can bring to us. And when you were speaking about it, I just thought to myself, it's just so obvious, it's so out there. If you open yourself up and listen. And you were talking about the lake, and I tend to like moving water myself. I like moving streams, and just what you speak of seems just so obviously intuitive.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. What would you say your motivation for writing the book was at this stage in your teaching? You've written 2 other books previously. What was the inspiration?
It seems like there's always something more that I want to communicate to help people do this practice. So they have an aspiration, they have a goal. It's not just Zen of being in the moment, but they have a goal to move toward settling into a deep calmness, which is always here. I mean, that's really what my thing. It's always here. They need to have that aspiration, keep it alive, but then they need to also do different practices to help them. So that I just thought, and I have to say, I'm even thinking of about a 4th book now. I have a new idea that I want, a new theme.
Excellent. Well, I was, Bussho brought it up beforehand. I just love the spilt milk on the cover. just because that speaks to serendipity. It speaks to going with the flow, as it were, to taking an accident and turning it into something positive, doing that flip, as you mentioned.
I get no credit for the spilt milk.
I think it's delightful, regardless.
Paula gets credit for the spilt milk.
Well, Bussho, do you have anything you wanted to bring to Tim's attention beforehand, before we wrap it all up, or Tim, do you have any final thoughts?
Well, I thought you were going to take questions.
I don't have anything coming my way right now.
Okay.
Some folks are there, but they seem not to have brought too much into our stream.
Oh, okay.
Just enjoying the event.
Okay.
All that means to us, is we have answered every possible question, because Tim is so comprehensive. Actually, what I can say, for folks who are not super familiar with Zen Buddhism, who are not familiar with Tim's other books, one of the things, because we used John Muir tonight, we talked a little bit about John Muir as kind of a mystic. He's a naturalist, so he's a science-based guy, but at some point, his study of nature cracks him open in a way, kind of like it does for Einstein, kind of like it does for other Stephen Hawking, like it does for, Carl Sagan, people who use science as a portal into the absolute. And I think it's fair to say about Tim that he's always been a kind of a perennial philosophy guy. And he said it really early in our time tonight about, yeah, of course this is true for Zen, but it's true for any spiritual path. And one of the most appealing things about Tim, and when he was the guiding teacher of Minnesota Zen Center, the kind of language that he used around the ideas and the practices always had to come home to Soto Zen, because that's what the center is, and that's always been our pole star. But he was really one of the first and most creative voices at the Zen Center, bringing in, here's how they talk about this same teaching in science. Here's how they talk about the same teaching in the Christian tradition. Mm-hmm. Here's how they talk about that same teaching. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because I think at first glance, a book around, the practices of Zen Buddhism can seem a little intimidating, or a little like, a little other. Like I would have to know way too much background in order to access material that seems that inscrutable or advanced. And the truth is, one of the great gifts of a really good Zen teacher is there are so many on-ramps in this book. It's written in such everyday language, just like his other two books, that the accessibility is never really a problem. It really, really isn't. So there's a happy accident in all of us having John Muir in common, but there's also a lot of intentionality around Tim choosing, use another example here that's going to pull somebody in. And does that make sense? We're just using other languages to talk about these central ideas. And I'm happy to say I have tried to emulate that in my own teaching career, because, as you said, Tim is my guy. But what I watched over the years was how skillfully that was done, and how many people who showed up for a Dharma talk might not have known much about Zen Buddhism, but walked away with something because of the diversity of language that he would use around these teaching ideas. And the book is no exception. This is a really, really easily accessible book, even though it doesn't water down the depth of the teachings.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you. I also want to say to people who in the Bay Area that since we do everything online, come join us sometime. I actually miss the Bay Area. I really miss it. So when someone comes online from the Bay Area, I always get excited.
Can you maybe afterwards forward us some information about how to link up to your talks, etc., so that we can put that in the chat for this event, and then people can have that handy?
Bussho, can you do that? Because I'm not.
I for sure can, and actually the instruction is as easy as visiting us online at minnesotazenmeditation.org. It's mnzencenter.org. Everything is there. Yeah, you can't miss it.
All right,
we'd love to see you.
We in the Bay Area will respond as best we can. I just want to thank you both so much for joining us today. This was just one of those conversations where you just learn something. You experience something, you breathe a little deeper, you have a little bit more of a I feel more relaxed having done it. It's been a stressful couple of weeks for me, and it's nice to have this moment of peace and two wonderful friends talking.
I think I spoke literally at book passage for my first book.
I would not be surprised. we're the place to be, and we certainly loved having you. And this has been a joy. So my pleasure to host you both. I want to thank everybody who joined us on the event today, either live or after the event. If you would like at any time to order the book, we have access to it through the channel here on YouTube or through Book Passage. We would love to have you support independent booksellers and Tim Burkett and his wonderful philosophy. And Enlightenment is an accident. Please do go out and get it. It's a wonderful read. Thank you both so much for joining us today. We're going to say goodbye now to all our followers and have a wonderful rest of your day. Farewell.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye to both of you.